Between these fragments, new oceans were born and expanded, and their warm waters lapped the edges of the continents, creating endless shallow seas. It was here, in these sunlit, mineral-rich waters, that something truly orsogeonicus was about to unfold. The atmosphere back then was also very different. Oxygen levels in the air were critically low, estimated at just 10–15% of what we breathe today. The sky may have had a different, paler hue, not the deep blue it is today, but the most important mystery took place not in the air, but underwater. Oxygen levels in the oceans slowly but surely increased. This was thanks to billions of microscopic photosynthetic bacteria and the first primitive algae. This process lasted for millions and millions of years, and finally, oxygen concentrations reached that critical point, that turning point after which the emergence of large, complex organisms became possible. Before this era, life on Earth was virtually invisible. For billions of years, microbes, bacteria, archaea, and other simple single-celled organisms ruled the oceans. Of course, larger formations existed, such as stromatolites, layered limestone structures that supported colonies of cyanobacteria, slowly building their reefs in shallow waters. But true multicellular animals, creatures with multiple types of cells, tissues, and organs, simply did not exist on the planet. The Ediacaran period turned everything upside down. Was Dickinsonia one of the first animals, a giant fungus, or a representative of an entirely different, completely extinct life form that left no descendants? Other bizarre creatures could be found alongside Dickinsonia. Charnia resembled a modern sea pen, a long stalk covered in numerous spirally arranged branches. It was anchored to the bottom and likely a filter feeder, filtering microscopic food particles from the water. Tribrachidium resembled a disc with 3 curved ridges radiating from the center, a unique triradiate symmetry. Its lifestyle and purpose remain a complete mystery. Sprigina had a more elongated, segmented body with a distinct thickening at one end, resembling a head. Some paleontologists see it as a distant ancestor of arthropods, but this remains just one of many theories. All these creatures lived peacefully in shallow waters where sunlight easily penetrated, nourishing bacterial mats and algae, their primary food source. They lived in a world without predators, a world where the primary goal was simply to exist, absorb energy, and slowly grow. There were no desperate chases, no deadly struggles for survival as we know it. It was a world of astonishing, almost unreal tranquility, where life took its first tentative steps toward multicellularity. However, not all Ediacaran organisms were completely passive. For example, Kimberella may have been one of the first truly active creatures. It looked like an elongated sac with ring-shaped folds on its body and, apparently, was able to slowly crawl along the seabed using primitive muscle contractions. This was the first hint of the future, a harbinger of an era when animals would become agile, fast, and learn to actively search for food or escape danger. But for now, movement was extremely rare. The overwhelming majority of the inhabitants of the Ediacaran seas preferred immobility, rooted to the seabed or simply lying on it. What's striking is the size of many of these organisms. Some reached tens of centimeters, even a meter in length. This seems incredible considering the low oxygen levels in the water. How did they manage to grow to such gigantic sizes without an efficient circulatory system to deliver oxygen to their tissues? The secret likely lies in their unique structure. Most Ediacaran creatures were incredibly flat, with a huge surface area relative to their body volume. This ingenious engineering solution allowed oxygen to penetrate or, in scientific terms, diffuse directly through their outer integuments to every part of the organism. Essentially, they were living, breathing carpets, so thin that every cell could obtain oxygen directly from the surrounding water. The Ediacaran world was not static. The oceans were slowly but steadily changing. Tectonic plates continued their perpetual motion, pushing apart continents and forming new ocean basins. Underwater volcanoes erupted, releasing vast quantities of minerals and heat into the water. These minerals served as food for photosynthetic organisms, which, in levels of toxic compounds like hydrogen sulfide decreased, but life on land remained virtually devoid of life. The continents of that time were silent, barren wastelands, bare rocks, endless sandy deserts, and plains devoid of a single green sprout. Soil, as we know it, didn't yet exist, only fragmented rock, devoid of any organic matter. Rains lashed these lifeless landscapes, and powerful torrents washed the sediment into rivers, which carried it to the ocean. Erosion was in full swing, but without plant roots to hold the soil in place, the process was chaotic and destructive. Perhaps only the thinnest films of bacteria and algae survived on damp coastal rocks, but nothing more complex. The climate of the Ediacaran period was surprisingly mild. After the end of the global ice age, Earth entered a period of steady warming. Polar ice caps apparently did not exist, and temperatures, even at high latitudes, remained moderate. The oceans were warm, especially near the equator, where water temperatures could reach 30–35 degrees Celsius. Ocean currents evenly distributed this heat across the planet, creating a stable and predictable climate. There were no abrupt seasonal changes, no icy winters, no sweltering summer heat. It was a calm, tranquil world, as if the planet were resting after the icy fever of the distant past. In this serene world, life boldly experimented. The Ediacaran biota, as scientists call these strange organisms, was nature's very first attempt to create complex multicellular forms. But this attempt, in a sense, proved a dead end. The vast majority of Ediacaran creatures left no direct descendants. They vanished without a trace at the end of the period, when conditions on the planet changed dramatically again. But they fulfilled their primary mission. They paved the way for those who came after them. They clearly demonstrated that multicellular life was possible, that organisms could be large, complex, and incredibly diverse. So what destroyed this strange world? Why did the Ediacaran biota vanish into oblivion? The answer lies in the events that unfolded at the boundary between the Ediacaran and the succeeding Cambrian periods. Approximately 541 million years ago, the oceans began to change again. Oxygen levels continued to rise, reaching previously unseen concentrations. This opened up entirely new evolutionary opportunities, but also created new deadly threats. In these oxygen-rich waters, new types of organisms began to emerge. Creatures armed with hard shells, sharp teeth, and predatory instincts. A new era was dawning, an era of ruthless struggle and brutal competition. It was a time when the air was supersaturated with oxygen, becoming a veritable paradise for giant insects. Imagine creatures that took advantage of this unique atmospheric chemistry to grow to sizes that seem unimaginable to us today. Look to the sky. There soars Meganeura, a gigantic dragonfly with a wingspan reaching 75 centimeters, like a modern hawk. It was the largest flying insect in the history of Earth. Its enormous compound eyes, composed of thousands of lenses, gave it a panoramic view, allowing it to instantly spot both carefree prey and lurking danger. Four powerful wings, powered by complex muscles, made Meganeura a true ace, capable of dizzying maneuvers. It was the undisputed ruler of the air, a deadly predator that snatched other insects in mid-flight with its powerful jaws. Its life began in the water. The Meganeura larvae, like their distant descendants, were fierce underwater hunters, and only after growing up did they emerge onto land to spread their wings and rise into the sky. Now, let's look down at the forest floor. Here, among the rotting ferns, slowly moves Arthropleura, a giant centipede, a living armored train up to 2.5 meters long and almost half a meter wide. It is the largest terrestrial invertebrate ever to crawl on our planet. Its body, composed of dozens of segments, each with a pair of legs, was covered in a tough, shiny shell, reliably protecting it from the few predators capable of challenging it. Ray-finned fish occupied every possible ecological niche, giving rise to the ancestors of modern sturgeon, catfish, and pike. Ammonoids, cephalopods with spiral shells, roamed the seas. Their sizes ranged from tiny, coin-sized, to veritable giants with shells up to 1 meter in diameter. In some regions, the seafloor was completely covered with dense forests of crinoids, or sea lilies. They grew so densely that literally every centimeter of the bottom was occupied by their swaying stems. When they died, their skeletons formed entire layers of crinoid limestone, consisting almost entirely of the fragments of these amazing creatures. But the most revolutionary events of the Carboniferous period unfolded on land. Here, vertebrates continued their great conquest of the continents. Amphibians, descendants of the lobe-finned fishes of the Devonian, reached the peak of their diversity. They included creatures ranging from tiny, the size of a modern lizard, to true giants several meters long. Here before us is Eriops, a typical representative of the amphibians of that era. This massive animal, up to 2 meters long, had a broad, flat head and short but powerful legs. Eriops spent most of its life in the water or at the very edge, ambushed by fish and other, smaller amphibians. Its mouth was lined with sharp teeth, ideal for holding slippery prey. Its skin had to remain constantly moist, which forever tied it to bodies of water. And in the forest floor, Diplovertebron, a smaller salamander-like amphibian, scurried about. It hunted insects and other invertebrates. Its streamlined body and long tail allowed it to swim well and move quickly on land, but it always stayed close to damp, shady areas. And yet, the greatest evolutionary breakthrough of the Carboniferous period was the emergence of amniotes, vertebrates that learned to lay eggs directly on land. Until then, all tetrapods were slaves to the water. Their eggs and larvae could develop only in a humid environment. The amniotic egg changed the rules of the game once and for all. Imagine this ingenious design. The egg was protected by a tough shell that kept it from drying out. Inside was a whole world. The amnion, a fluid-filled sac that surrounded the embryo like a personal ocean. The allantois, a waste storage area. And the yolk sac, a reserve of nutrients. Now the young could develop entirely within the egg and hatch as a fully formed miniature replica of the adult animal. This gave the amniotes freedom. They were no longer tied to water for reproduction. One of the first such pioneers was Hylonomus, a small 20-centimeter-long reptile. Its fossils were found in a remarkable location, inside the petrified stumps of ancient trees in Nova Scotia. These tiny creatures likely hid there from predators or the elements, but sometimes the trunk became a deadly trap. Hylonomus had a slender, scaled body and a long tail. Plant food was too tough and difficult for them to digest due to its high cellulose content. Only much later would animals with complex digestive systems capable of extracting energy from this green mass appear. Toward the end of the Carboniferous period, the climate began to change again. The formation of the supercontinent Pangaea, stretching from pole to pole, redrew the entire map of the world. The interior regions of this gigantic landmass were cut off from the oceans, and moist winds simply couldn't reach them. The great drying began. The vast swampy forests that had given birth to coal and giant insects began to retreat and disappear, giving way to drier landscapes. An era was drawing to an end. Imagine the very atmosphere of ancient Earth changing. Levels of carbon dioxide, that invisible blanket warming the planet, began to fall. And as a result, global cold began to spread across the globe. Here, at the south pole of the giant continent of Gondwana, we see ice caps beginning to form. Vast glaciers, like living creatures, inexorably advance, devouring ever larger territories. The climate, once stable, is now becoming an arena of extremes, where seasons of torrential rains alternate with severe drought, and periods of warmth with piercing cold. These planetary changes are dealing a devastating blow to the plant world. The impenetrable swamp forests of the early and middle Carboniferous, where moisture-loving club mosses and giant horsetails reign supreme, are beginning to retreat. Their era is coming to an end. They are being replaced by new, more resilient species, true fighters for survival in harsh conditions. These include seed ferns, cardites, and the first conifers. we are witnessing the drying up of the great swamps that accumulated peat for centuries, and with them, the very possibility of coal formation disappears. By the end of the Carboniferous era, this process almost completely ceases, but climate change isn't just affecting plants, it's a death sentence for countless animals. Entire species of amphibians, whose lives were inextricably linked to water and swampy marshes, are facing extinction. Their familiar world is disappearing before their eyes, but where some lose out, others gain an incredible advantage. These are the amniotes, creatures whose ability to lay eggs on land freed them from the shackles of water. They begin their triumphant march, conquering and colonizing the drier regions of the sprawling Pangaea. Even the insect world is forced to adapt to the new reality. Species are emerging with far more sophisticated mechanisms for retaining precious moisture within their bodies. Some insect groups are beginning to undertake bold evolutionary experiments, developing complete metamorphosis, an astonishing life cycle. Climate changes triggered by the formation of Pangaea and falling carbon dioxide levels were already reshaping the planet. In the following Permian period, these processes would reach their climax and lead to one of the most devastating mass extinctions in Earth's history. But before this catastrophe struck, life would experience its final, dazzling flowering, giving birth to wondrous creatures, many of which would leave no descendants in the future. So, 299 million years ago, Earth enters a new chapter in its history, one that will be the scene of both the greatest triumph of terrestrial life and the most horrific catastrophe it has ever known. The Permian period begins, a time of absolute extremes. We'll see everything from thriving ecosystems teeming with diverse plants and animals to near destruction, with life on the planet hanging by a thread. This was the era when synapsids, our distant ancestors, the ancestors of all mammals, held unchallenged sway on land. It was the era when the first true coniferous forests appeared, and when climatic upheavals reached unprecedented proportions. By the beginning of the Permian period, the formation of Pangaea was almost complete. This colossal supercontinent, like a giant puzzle, connected almost all land masses and stretched from the North Pole to the South Pole. To the north lay the lands that millions of years later would become North America, Europe, and Asia. To the south, Africa, South America, Antarctica, Australia, and India formed a single entity. Between these two parts of Pangaea, like a giant wedge, lay the vast Tethys Ocean, and to the west, the boundless waters of the Panthalassa Ocean stretched to the horizon, covering more than half the planet's surface. The emergence of Pangaea had truly dramatic consequences for climate. Imagine a vast continent stretching from pole to pole. Its interior regions were thousands of kilometers removed from the oceans, and moisture-bearing winds simply couldn't reach them. This led to the formation of colossal deserts and semi-deserts in the heart of Pangaea. Coastal zones remained wetter, but even there the climate became sharply seasonal, with alternating rainy and dry seasons. At the South Pole, in the lands of Gondwana, the Great Ice Age, which had begun at the end of the Carboniferous, continued. Massive ice sheets covered the territories of future Antarctica, South Africa, South America, and Australia. This gigantic glaciation affected the entire planet, lowering sea levels and generating cold currents that extended far north. However, towards the middle of the Permian, the glaciers began to retreat and the global climate gradually warmed. The atmosphere of the early Permian was still rich in oxygen, although its level had begun to decline from its peak of 35% during the Carboniferous period. By the end of the era, oxygen content would plummet to 15–16%, even lower than modern levels. Simultaneously, carbon dioxide concentrations began to rise, especially at the end of the period, when monstrous volcanic activity released unimaginable volumes into the atmosphere. This triggered a powerful greenhouse effect and led to abrupt global warming. The plant life of the Permian period was strikingly different from what we see in the Carboniferous swamp forests. The moisture-loving giant club mosses and horsetails that dominated in the past almost completely disappeared as the swamps shrank. They were replaced by plants more adapted to drought. Conifers now became the dominant force in many ecosystems. Early conifers, such as Walchia and Voltsia, had needle-like leaves covered in a thick, waxy cuticle that helped conserve precious moisture. They formed forests somewhat reminiscent of modern conifers and thrived in drier regions. In the southern latitudes of Gondwana, seed ferns known as glossopterids dominated. Glossopteris was a medium-sized tree with distinctive tongue-shaped leaves, which gave the entire group its name. These plants were perfectly adapted to the cold climate of high latitudes, forming vast forests there, reaching right to the edges of the ice sheets. Their fossilized remains are found today throughout South America, Africa, Antarctica, Australia, and India, providing some of the strongest evidence for the existence of a single continent, Gondwana. It fed on coarse leaves, twigs, and possibly even algae in coastal waters. Its digestive system must have been incredibly complex to cope with such a diet, capable of processing tough cellulose, likely with the help of an army of symbiotic bacteria that inhabited its digestive system. Let's travel to the banks of ancient rivers, where another inhabitant of these places awaits us. Imagine a creature eerily reminiscent of a modern crocodile, but in fact belonging to a completely different branch of evolution. This is Ophiachodon, a semi-aquatic synapsid, a true hunter of Permian rivers and swamps. Its elongated, narrow mouth was studded with needle-sharp teeth, the perfect tool for capturing slippery prey. Ophiachodon spent most of its life in murky waters, stalking unwary fish and amphibians. Only occasionally did it emerge onto land to bask in the sun or, perhaps, reproduce. But time passed, and by the middle of the Permian, the age of pelycosaurs began to wane. They began to yield their position to a new, much more advanced group of synapsids. The therapsids, often referred to as mammal-like reptiles, entered the scene. And this is no coincidence, as in many ways they were significantly more advanced creatures. Look at their skull. Its structure became more complex, and the temporal fenestra, the opening behind the eye socket, was significantly enlarged. This seemingly simple change allowed for the development of much more powerful jaw muscles. Their teeth also underwent a revolution, becoming more specialized. They developed incisors for biting off chunks, sharp canines for piercing flesh, and molars designed for chewing and grinding food. The therapsid's legs shifted from a lateral position to a more vertical position, directly under the body, making their gait and running incomparably more efficient. At the top of the food chain during the late Permian period, true monsters reigned supreme, the Gorgonopsidae. These ferocious predators, growing to 3 or even 4 meters in length, were the living embodiment of nightmare. Their primary weapon were gigantic, saber-shaped fangs that sank like daggers into the flesh of their prey, delivering a single, yet utterly fatal bite. One of the largest representatives of this group, Inostrancevia, could weigh up to 300 kilograms. This apex predator was capable of overpowering even the largest herbivores of its time. Its massive skull concealed the crushing power of its jaws, and some scientists speculate that its body may already have been covered in short fur or hair-like structures, the first tentative steps toward the thermal insulation that would become the hallmark of mammals. The world of herbivorous therapsids was dominated by another incredibly successful group, the descendants. Their very name translates as two-fanged. Indeed, most of these creatures had only a pair of powerful canines in the upper jaw. All other teeth were gone, replaced by a robust, horny beak, very similar to that of modern turtles. These animals were astonishing in their diversity, from tiny rat-sized creatures to true giants like Lystrosaurus, which reached the size of a large pig. Using their beaks, the cynodonts cut tough plant stems, then crushed them into a nutritious paste with their powerful jaws. Toward the end of the Permian, cynodonts, the most advanced and promising group of therapsids, emerged. They developed complex, multi-cusped molars, allowing them to grind food with incredible efficiency. A secondary bony palate formed in their skull, a partition separating the nasal passage from the oral cavity. This ingenious evolutionary invention allowed them to breathe and chew simultaneously. Their limbs were positioned almost vertically beneath their bodies, and their skin was apparently covered in thick fur. Cynodonts became a living bridge between reptiles and mammals. It was from their ranks in the following Triassic period that the first true mammals would emerge. But don't think that the Permian world belonged only to synapsids. Sauropsids, or reptiles as we know them, also flourished and developed. Among them, the parareptiles stood out, including pariasaurs, massive, clumsy herbivores whose skin was covered with bony plaques and bumps like armor. Scutosaurus, one of the largest pariasaurs, grew up to 3 meters in length and weighed about a ton. Its barrel-shaped body rested on short, thick legs, and its bony plates provided reliable protection from the fangs of predators. Another great branch of reptiles, the diapsids, also gave rise to several key evolutionary lines. It was then that the very first archosauromorphs appeared, the ancestors of the future rulers of the planet, dinosaurs, flying pterosaurs, and crocodiles. True, in the Permian period, they were still small and inconspicuous creatures, hiding in the shadows of giants. Nimble, lizard-like reptiles scurried through the undergrowth, hunting countless insects. And what about amphibians? They still existed, but their golden age was over. As the vast carboniferous swamps dried up, most large amphibians died out. Those that survived were primarily aquatic or semi-aquatic, finding refuge in rivers and lakes. Among them were temnospondyls, like the predatory Eriops, and semi-aquatic giants like Mastodonsaurus, which, however, would have to appear in the Triassic. The oceans of the Permian period were also teeming with life. Sharks continued to evolve, although many of their ancient relatives had vanished into oblivion. Bony fish reigned supreme in both marine and fresh water. Ray-finned fish diversified into a vast number of groups, mastering a wide variety of ecological niches. But perhaps the most astonishing marine creatures of that era were the reptiles that decided to return to the water. Mesosaurs. Mesosaurus were small aquatic lizards about 1 meter long. Their long, narrow jaws were lined with a dense array of thin, needle-like teeth. They swam in fresh and brackish lagoons, catching small crustaceans and fish. Remarkably, mesosaur fossils are found only in South America and Africa, providing further compelling evidence that these continents were a single entity during the Permian period. The seafloor remained teeming with brachiopods, although their former diversity began to wane. They were gradually supplanted by bivalves, which occupied the same niches but were much more successful. Ammonoids, whose spirally coiled shells were adorned with intricate patterns, flourished in the water column. Sea lilies still formed entire underwater meadows, but their numbers were also thinning. The coral reefs of the Permian period were quite modest. The ancient tabulate corals had almost disappeared, and rugosa, or tetraorbital corals, were only occasionally encountered. Reef structures were now formed primarily by calcareous sponges and algae, but they were a far cry from the former grandeur of the reefs of the Devonian and Carboniferous periods. By the end of the Permian, the planet's climate had become truly hellish, extremely hot and dry. The Great Gondwanaland Ice Age ended, and the ice caps melted even at the South Pole. Temperatures across the planet soared. Animals died from thirst, hunger, and exposure to toxic air. Food chains collapsed as plants, the foundation of any ecosystem, could not survive in these hellish conditions. By geological standards, the extinction occurred rapidly, perhaps in just a few tens of thousands of years. But for living creatures, it was a long and painful agony. Ecosystems collapsed one after another. The most vulnerable species perished first, followed by the more resilient ones. By the end of this catastrophe, only the most resilient organisms, capable of withstanding extreme temperatures, oxygen deficiency, and a toxic environment, survived. All coral reefs in the oceans disappeared. Ancient rugose and tabulate corals died out to the last. trilobites, which had survived on Earth for nearly 300 million years and survived several previous mass extinctions, disappeared forever this time. Most brachiopod species perished. Entire groups of ammonoids, sea lilies, and sea urchins were wiped out. Entire classes of marine animals were wiped off the map of life. On land, almost all large vertebrates perished. The fearsome gorgonopsians vanished without a trace. Most dicynodonts were wiped out, with only a few genera surviving. The armored pariasaurs also became extinct. Many groups of reptiles and amphibians were completely exterminated. Of the rich diversity of Permian synapsids, only a few lineages survived, mostly small, inconspicuous forms. Even after such an apocalypse, in this world of ashes and ruins, surviving species began their long journey to rebirth, adapting and evolving. From the ashes of the Permian catastrophe, a completely new world will arise, the world of the Triassic period. This will be the era when dinosaurs take their first, still hesitant steps, when tiny, shadow-hugging mammals appear, and when life, against all odds, finds a way to flourish once again. 252 million years ago, a devastated, crippled planet appears before us. The Permian Triassic extinction event left behind a ghost world in which only the most resilient and undemanding creatures could survive. All complex ecosystems were razed to the ground. Food chains that had been built over millions of years were torn to shreds, and the vast majority of species disappeared from the face of the Earth forever. But the very nature of life contains an astonishing ability to recover, even after the most devastating blows. The Triassic period was an era of slow, painful rebirth. It was a time of bold evolutionary experiments, when nature, as if on a blank canvas, began to create entirely new groups of animals that were destined to change the face of the planet for the next 150 million years. At the beginning of the Triassic, all land was still gathered into a single gigantic supercontinent, Pangaea, stretching from pole to pole. Its shape resembled a giant letter C facing east, and the vast warm Tethys Ocean slid into this curve of land. To the west, as far as the eye could see, stretched the boundless Panthalassa Ocean, covering most of the globe. The interior regions of Pangaea, however, remained extremely harsh. These were endless, sun-baked deserts, where rain was a rare occurrence, and air temperatures rose to extreme levels incompatible with life. The climate of the early Triassic was truly harsh, hot, and unstable. The planet has still not recovered from the effects of the catastrophe. The atmosphere was oversaturated with carbon dioxide, creating a powerful greenhouse effect. Average temperatures were 6 to 10 degrees higher than today, even at the poles, where there was no hint of ice caps. The equatorial regions were so scorching that they were quite possibly completely unsuitable for large vertebrates. During the day, animals were forced to seek refuge in the shade of rocks or deep burrows, emerging to forage only in the cool twilight. Moreover, atmospheric oxygen levels were dangerously low, only about 15–16%. This created enormous breathing difficulties, especially at elevated altitudes. Such thin air could have seriously limited the distribution of both animals and plants in mountainous regions. Sea levels were relatively low at the beginning of the period, but they gradually rose, slowly flooding coastal lowlands and changing the contours of the continent. The recovery of life after the Great Dying was an incredibly slow process. Araucarias, distant relatives of modern monkey trees, grew in temperate latitudes, forming tall, majestic forests with dense canopies. Podosimites, an extinct group of conifers similar in appearance to modern yews and cypresses, preferred drier regions. Their needle-like leaves were covered in a thick layer of wax to retain precious moisture. Ginkgo trees, which originated in the Permian, flourished in the Triassic. Their distinctive fan-shaped leaves rustled in the wind, and the trees themselves could grow up to 30 meters tall. Cycads were also widespread, especially in tropical and subtropical regions. These palm-like plants had thick trunks strewn with the bases of old fallen leaves and a luxurious crown of long, feathery leaves at the very top, and Toward the end of the Triassic, Bennetites emerged, an extinct group of plants that superficially resembled cycads, but were evolutionarily closer to angiosperms. They possessed massive cone-like structures for reproduction, which some paleontologists believe resembled primitive flowers. It was the Bennetites that would become a crucial part of Mesozoic ecosystems, serving as food for generations of herbivorous dinosaurs. The fauna of the early Triassic was truly extraordinary. Numerous ecological niches left empty by the extinction event were slowly filled by surviving groups. And here we meet a true champion, Lystrosaurus. Millions of cubic kilometers of molten lava poured onto the surface, and unimaginable volumes of carbon dioxide were released into the atmosphere. The world turned into a greenhouse. Global warming and ocean acidification became a death sentence for most living things. Acid rain poisoned both land and water. Many thriving groups simply couldn't withstand such dramatic changes. Crurataceae, which dominated land throughout the Triassic, were almost completely wiped out. Only the ancestors of crocodiles managed to survive, finding refuge in rivers and swamps. Giant amphibians also became extinct. The oceans also became devastated. Many groups of marine reptiles disappeared, and ammonoids once again suffered devastating losses. Coral reefs were destroyed, but for the dinosaurs, this catastrophe was their finest hour. For some reason, they survived the extinction relatively easily. And when their main competitors, the Crurataceae, disappeared, a whole world opened up before them, free of their former masters. Dinosaurs had a unique opportunity to fill all the empty ecological niches. In the coming Jurassic period, they would become the absolute dominant species on land, achieving an incredible flowering of form and size. The Triassic was their birthplace, but the Jurassic would be their era of triumph. It was in the shadow of the fading Triassic world, at the end of this period, that the first mammals appeared on the scene. These tiny creatures, no larger than a modern mouse or shrew, descended from cynodont reptiles. They already had fur, were warm-blooded, and their teeth were categorized by function. They likely already nursed their young. These first mammals led a secretive nocturnal lifestyle, hunting insects and hiding from giant reptiles in burrows and forest litter. Throughout the age of dinosaurs, they would remain unassuming and almost unnoticed, but within them lay the germ of the future. When the dinosaurs disappear, it will be mammals who will inherit the planet. The Triassic period was a time of great restoration, bold evolutionary experiments, and the birth of new dynasties. It began on a devastated, nearly dead planet and ended with a world full of thriving and diverse ecosystems. Dinosaurs took their first tentative steps. Pterosaurs took to the skies for the first time. Marine reptiles conquered the oceans, and the first mammals emerged in the shadow of the dinosaurs. The stage was set for the next act in life's great drama, the Jurassic period, the golden age of dinosaurs. The Jurassic period is an era when Earth, having recovered from the upheavals of the Triassic, flourished with a new, unprecedented vigor. The planet became warmer, wetter, and greener. Where once there were sun-baked deserts, now there are endless humid forests of giant conifers, ferns, and cycads. The Jurassic era became a battleground for some of the most ferocious and effective killers in the history of the planet. At the top of this prehistoric food chain, the Allosaurus reigned supreme, a long, incredibly strong, and lightning-fast hunter. Its enormous inward-curving teeth were the perfect tool for tearing the flesh of its prey. These predators worked together in packs, making them a deadly threat to any inhabitant of these lands. Just imagine this scene. A pack of hungry Allosaurus closing in on a young Diplodocus that had strayed from the herd, their thunderous, blood-curdling roar echoing across the surrounding area. In such brutal battles, the fate of not just one creature was decided, but the future of entire populations. But giants weren't the only ones shaping the landscape of the Jurassic era. At the same time, Dinosaurs of much smaller stature, nimble and agile creatures, were also actively spreading across the planet. They found refuge in dense fern thickets, hunting insects, fish, and other small creatures. These inconspicuous creatures were the ancestors of what we would later call birds. Their plumage, not yet completely adapted for flight, served a different function. It kept them warm and served as a striking element in mating rituals. It was then, in the Jurassic period, that nature took its first tentative step toward creating the wondrous world of birds. The Jurassic sky was dominated not only by these feathered harbingers of the future, but also by the true kings of the air, the pterosaurs, Pterosauria. With leathery wings, whose span in some species reached 10 meters, they glided majestically over the coastal waters, snatching fish and unwary small animals. Their graceful shadows, falling on the ground, painted scenes in the sky that still capture our imagination today. Some were tiny, no larger than a modern sparrow, while others were true flying giants. And together, they created a unique atmosphere of a living, dynamic, and incredibly noisy world. The ancient seas of that era were full of their own mysteries and wonders. The Jurassic oceans literally teemed with life, reigned by the ichthyosaurs, Ichthyosauria, lightning-fast sea hunters, their body shape strikingly reminiscent of modern dolphins. They pierced the water with incredible speed, pursuing schools of fish and cephalopods. Plesiosaurs, Plesiosauria, with their incredibly long serpentine necks and powerful flippers-like wings, gracefully soared through the dark depths. And alongside them lived Pleosauria, massive sea monsters whose bite possessed one of the most devastating forces in the history of the planet. All these amazing creatures existed in a stunning natural balance. Jurassic Earth was a gigantic, harmonious organism where every element had its place. Lush vegetation provided food for herbivorous giants. They, in turn, were hunted by predators, and after their death, their remains became food for smaller creatures and fertilized the soil. Life in the Jurassic era was characterized not only by a constant struggle for survival, but also by astonishing evolutionary experiments. It was during this period that the first primitive mammals appeared on the planet. These creatures were tiny, nocturnal, hiding in the shadows of giants and seeking refuge in underground burrows to avoid becoming easy prey for the all-powerful dinosaurs. But it was precisely these inconspicuous creatures that, in the distant future, were destined to become our ancestors. The Jurassic period is a time when nature itself seemed to decide to demonstrate the boundless scope of its imagination. In the forests, where a pristine silence reigned and the air was thick with the damp scent of pine needles and rotting leaves, everything around was filled with the breath of life. Every tree, every river, every lake served as a stage for both small dramas of survival and great acts of evolution. Colossal herds of sauropods, gigantic herbivorous lizards, slowly trudged across the endless plains. Their sheer size was staggering. Their long tails served as formidable weapons for defense against predators, and their incredible necks reached to the very tops of the trees. But there was something peaceful and calm about these majestic creatures. They moved leisurely, with dignity, as if the earth itself supported them. And yet, even these super predators were merely a link in the great chain of life. They did not destroy the world around them, but rather maintained its fragile balance. The key to this incredible flourishing of life was the Jurassic climate. Warmth and high humidity created a truly heavenly environment for all living things. Winters were mild and summers were warm and long. Ice caps at the poles simply did not exist at that time, allowing vegetation to flourish year-round. Endless forests stretched from the equator to the polar latitudes. Where today lie lifeless deserts or icebound lands, life once teemed. But one should not think that that world was ideal and serene. Jurassic Earth regularly reminded us of its devastating power. Giant volcanoes erupted, drenching the surrounding area with streams of molten lava and burying everything in which were still slowly drifting. The supercontinent Pangaea gradually broke apart, and new oceans formed in its place. This global process changed the face of the planet, creating new coastlines, islands, and seas. For the inhabitants of that time, this wasn't a catastrophe, but a natural part of their existence. Dinosaurs adapted, migrated, and colonized new territories. Where volcanic activity had destroyed forests, young growth would reappear years later, attracting herds of animals. The eternal cycle of destruction and creation was an integral part of nature. This era holds a crucial lesson. The grandeur and beauty of the Jurassic world were not the result of stasis and rest. On the contrary, they were born of constant global change. It was precisely through this constant movement that life evolved, became more complex, and gave birth to ever new forms. The Jurassic period left us a legacy of landscapes that are impossible to imagine and forget. Imagine a valley wedged between mountains, where a herd of brachiosaurs slowly walks in the rays of the setting sun. Their dark silhouettes are reflected in the calm surface of the river, while pterosaurs soar silently high above. Somewhere in the distance, the roar of an allosaurus can be heard, a constant reminder that there is no such thing as absolute safety in this world. It was a planet of striking contrasts, simultaneously peaceful and deadly, beautiful and indescribably cruel. It was then that the Jurassic period reached its peak, and life on the planet flourished on a scale never before seen. Colossal forests stretched across the continents, where pines, Ediacarias, and ancient cycads soared tens of meters into the air. Their dense crowns intertwined, creating a unique, mysterious world of semi-darkness beneath their canopy. In these forests, every sound, every rustle was a note in a grand symphony of nature. There, among the gigantic roots and impenetrable thickets, titans slowly made their way: Diplodocus, Apatosaurus, and Brachiosaurus. In times of danger, Stegosaurus turned into living weapons. They turned towards the enemy with their most formidable part, their tail, crowned with deadly spikes, and began to wave it with such fury and force that even the most desperate and bloodthirsty predators preferred to retreat and look for simpler prey. At that time, predators dominated the planet no less than the herbivorous giants. In the shadows of prehistoric forests and across endless plains, Allosaurus hunted, terrifying predators whose bodies could reach 12 meters in length. Their colossal jaws, lined with rows of dagger-sharp teeth, turned every attack into a death sentence for their victims. Allosaurus were versatile killers. They could stalk prey alone, relying on their sheer might, or gather in coordinated packs, making them a threat to even the largest inhabitants of that era. Let's move into the very center of such a hunt. Here, a pack of several Allosaurus surrounds a colossal Diplodocus. They understand that they cannot defeat such a giant with a single swift strike. Their tactic is a war of attrition. They pounce on it again and again, sinking their teeth into the flesh, leaving deep, jagged wounds. Hour after hour, they wear down their prey until the giant, bleeding and exhausted from the endless attacks, finally collapses to the ground. And at that very moment, the prehistoric forest resounds with the victorious cries of the predators as they begin their bloody feast. These powerful tectonic processes changed everything: the climate, the distribution of ecosystems, and the habitual migration routes of ancient animals. The world of the Jurassic was incredibly dynamic, constantly changing, yet at the same time, it seemed unshakable and eternal. Dinosaurs reigned supreme on land, pterosaurs in the skies, and marine reptiles in the oceans, and it seemed nothing could ever shake their dominance. But over the horizon, the dawn of a new act in the great evolutionary drama was already breaking. Following the Jurassic, the Cretaceous period would arrive, a time of the emergence of flowering plants, new, even more advanced predators, and, ultimately, a great catastrophe that would forever end the age of dinosaurs. But for now, the Jurassic world was at the peak of its grandeur, a golden age of giants who will dinosaurs, a breeding ground for new plant forms, and a cradle for the first primitive mammals, still hiding in the shadows of the giants, but already preparing to take their place in the sun. At the beginning of the Cretaceous, our planet's landmass resembled a giant puzzle, composed of slowly drifting continental plates. Pangaea had finally broken apart into two enormous supercontinents, Laurasia in the north and Gondwana in the south. Between them, like a growing rift, the Atlantic Ocean slowly widened, still narrow and shallow, but already clearly delineating the future boundary between the old and new worlds. Sea levels rose, and the sea flooded vast tracts of land, creating vast, shallow inland seas that made the planet's climate even milder and wetter. The weather during the Cretaceous period was exceptionally warm. Imagine a world where even the poles were ice-free. Where there is perpetual snow today, dense forests grew back then, inhabited by dinosaurs adapted to the long polar nights. The average global temperature was significantly higher than today. Endless forests of conifers and ferns stretched everywhere. But it was then that an event occurred that can be called a true revolution in the history of the plant world, the appearance of the first flowering plants. Until then, the landscapes had been rather monotonous. Evergreen conifers, giant horsetails, cycads, and ferns. Flowering plants radically transformed ecosystems. This predator, which grew up to 12 meters in length, possessed incredible jaw strength, capable of crushing even the thickest bones with ease. It became a true symbol of the Cretaceous period and a living embodiment of the entire age of dinosaurs. But the world wasn't limited to dry land. The seas and oceans literally teemed with life. Giant predatory reptiles hunted there, mosasaurs, long-necked plesiosaurs, and their faster relatives. These creatures ruled the ocean depths, hunting fish, ammonites, and even attacking each other. Ammonites, mollusks with beautifully twisted shells, were abundant and served as a vital part of the marine food chain. Pterosaurs soared in the sky. They became the absolute record holders for size among all flying creatures that ever lived on Earth. Quetzalcoatlus, which lived at the end of the Cretaceous period, had a wingspan of up to 12 meters. That's longer than many modern fighter aircraft. Parallel to the dominance of dinosaurs and other giants, another, quiet but no less important story, unfolded in the shadows. Small mammals, primarily nocturnal and feeding on insects, became increasingly diverse. Among them were already primitive, marsupial and placental forms, the very groups that would soon occupy all the vacant ecological niches after the extinction of the dinosaurs. In the Cretaceous, they were still hiding in the undergrowth, but it was then that the foundation for the future dominance of mammals was being laid. It presented the world with unprecedented life forms, forever changed ecosystems with the emergence of flowering plants, and laid the foundation for all future development of life on Earth. It was an age of giants, an age of incredible beauty and primordial terror, an age that ended in global tragedy, which, however, made way for new masters. Thus ended the Mesozoic era, and a new history began, a history that ultimately led to the emergence of man. Events unfolding over millions of years created a world that will never be repeated in the history of our planet. Let us travel to these ancient, silent oceans. Here, in this cradle of life, the Ediacaran creatures were not alone. The entire water column was permeated with myriads of microscopic algae that wove into thick, swaying clouds, giving the ocean a murky green hue. And the seafloor? It was carpeted with a solid, living carpet of bacterial mats. Imagine a sticky, elastic surface across which some of these strange creatures could slowly move, like ghosts. These bacterial mats were so dense and viscous that they acted like a natural glue, stabilizing the bottom sediments and protecting them from being washed away by underwater currents. It is precisely because of this unique circumstance that perfect imprints of Ediacaran organisms have been preserved on the seafloor of ancient oceans. Kimberella possessed an oval body with a wide, muscular foot, which it apparently used to slowly crawl along the bottom, and also possessed something resembling a primitive shell. If this hypothesis is correct, Kimberella represents a crucial link in the evolution of animals that later acquired hard body parts. Other paleontologists are far more skeptical. They point out that most Ediacaran creatures have such a strange anatomy that they cannot be related to any extant animal group. Their unusual radial or even triradiate symmetry, the complete absence of visible digestive organs, and their bizarre body segmentation all hint that they may have been a grand experiment by nature itself, an attempt to create multicellular life according to a completely different blueprint, which ultimately failed to produce modern forms. Perhaps the Ediacaran fauna was a kind of plan A of evolution that proved unviable and was discarded in favor of a more successful plan B. Animals with hard skeletons, active, mobile, and capable of complex behavior. But whether or not the Ediacaran organisms were our direct ancestors, their contribution to the history of life cannot be overstated. They proved that multicellularity was a realistic and promising developmental pathway. They demonstrated the incredible diversity of forms life can take. They created the first ecosystems in the planet's history, in which different organisms interacted with each other, albeit in a very primitive manner. All of this was gunpowder, ready to explode into a dazzling display of incredible diversity. The Ediacaran period was a long and majestic prelude to the great symphony of life that was about to resound in full force in the advancing Cambrian. When we look at the fossilized footprints of Ediacaran creatures today, we see more than just the tracks of ancient animals. We see frozen evidence of that moment when life took a giant leap forward, when single-celled organisms first combined to create something greater than the sum of its parts. We see the very beginning of that long journey that ultimately led to the emergence of fish, dinosaurs, mammals, and, ultimately, humans themselves. The Ediacaran period is our deepest past, a time when our planet was just learning to be truly alive. The quiet waters of the Ediacaran seas have long since dried up. The strange, dreamlike creatures that inhabited them are gone forever. But their legacy lives on in every multicellular organism on this planet, in each of us. We carry within us the genetic memory of this ancient time, encoded in the structure of our cells, in the very possibility of our existence. The Ediacaran period was more than just another episode in Earth's history. It was the birth of the story of complex life, a story that is still being written today. 541 million years ago, something incredible happened. In just 20-25 million years, a blink of an eye on the geological clock, the Earth's oceans literally exploded with an unprecedented diversity of life. This event was so sudden and dramatic that scientists have given it a fitting name, the Cambrian explosion. If the Ediacaran period was a quiet prelude, the Cambrian became a thunderous overture to the grand opera of life that has been unfolding on our planet for over 500 million years. What was the trigger? Why did life suddenly begin experimenting with such frantic enthusiasm? The answers to these questions lie in the complex interplay of numerous factors: environmental, geological, and genetic. Oxygen levels in the oceans finally reached critical levels, allowing animals to develop a rapid metabolism and lead active lifestyles. Mineral concentrations, especially calcium, increased to the point that organisms were able to build strong protective shells and armor. But perhaps the most important catalyst was the emergence of predation. For the first time in the planet's history, some animals began to deliberately hunt others. This triggered an unprecedented arms race between predators and their prey. Imagine a Cambrian sea. The water is warm and crystal clear, rich in oxygen. Sunbeams penetrate the shallows to the very bottom, creating whimsical, dancing patterns of light on the sand. But this is no longer the serene world of the Ediacaran period. Here, everything is teeming with life. bizarre arthropods, resembling a strange hybrid of shrimp and armadillo, scurry busily along the bottom. Jellyfish hover in the water, their translucent domes rhythmically pulsating. Motionless creatures in durable shells, constantly filtering the water, hover on the rocks, and somewhere there, in the thickets of ancient algae, he lurks, the most fearsome hunter of his era. This creature with enormous bulging eyes and a pair of deadly grasping appendages. Its name was Anomalocaris, and it was the terror of the Cambrian seas. Reaching almost a meter in length, it was an absolute giant among its contemporaries. Its segmented body was covered in a flexible yet durable shell. Wide lobes ran along its sides, which it used to undulate as it glided through the water. But its most terrifying weapons were its forelimbs, long, jointed, and studded with sharp spines. Anomalocaris used them like hands, grabbing unwary prey and bringing it directly to its mouth. And its mouth was truly terrifying. A round opening surrounded by a ring of razor-sharp plates that closed like a camera diaphragm, easily crushing the shells of its victims. Curiously, for a long time, scientists couldn't figure out what kind of creature this was. Its remains were found in pieces and described as belonging to entirely different animals. The front appendages were mistaken for the body of some exotic shrimp. The era of the Archaeocyathids, the first reef builders, has come to an end. The fearsome Anomalocaris and its kin, once kings of the seas, are now mere ghosts of the past, rare relics of a bygone era. But where some gave way, others took their place. Trilobites, those armored knights of the ancient seafloor, didn't just survive, they thrived, mastering new niches. Alongside them, brachiopods and mollusks continued their triumphant march. And it was then, in the shadow of these giants, that humble, almost inconspicuous creatures emerged. The first, primitive fish. These were tiny, jawless creatures, their only support a primitive notochord. They seemed insignificant, but they were destined to completely rewrite the rules of the game on the planet in the coming era. The Cambrian explosion became a defining moment in the history of life. In a remarkably short period of time, by geological standards, such a riot of forms and structures emerged that it laid the foundation for all subsequent evolution of the animal kingdom. Almost all modern animal phyla, with rare exceptions, trace their lineage back to the Cambrian. This means that the fundamental blueprints for body structure, what distinguishes an arthropod from a mollusk and a creature with a notochord from an echinoderm, were created and solidified then, more than 500 million years ago. To glimpse this lost world, let's travel to the Canadian Rockies. Each individual, a zooid, lived in its own microscopic cell, extending a crown of tentacles to filter the water. Thousands of these zooids worked harmoniously as a single organism, attaching themselves to rocks, shells, or each other to create complex three-dimensional structures, a veritable metropolis for numerous other organisms. But the most impressive architects of the Ordovician were the corals. For the first time in the planet's history, these animals appeared in large numbers and began to form true reef systems. Of course, Ordovician corals were very different from modern ones. They belonged to the Tabulata and Rugosa groups, which were destined to disappear completely by the end of the Paleozoic era. Tabulata corals built massive colonies of tightly packed tubular chambers separated by horizontal septa. Rugosa corals, or horn corals, could be either solitary or colonial, and their skeletons had characteristic radial septa that created a complex pattern. These first coral reefs were veritable oases, teeming with life. Trilobites hid in their crevices, mollusks slowly crawled, and worms burrowed into the sediment. And predators soared above the reefs. Primitive cephalopods, nautiloids, and the first ancestors of what would become octopuses and squids. Ordovician nautiloids were incredibly diverse. Some had straight, conical shells reaching several meters in length. Others had curved, horn-like shells. All were active active predators, using their tentacles to capture prey and jet propulsion for rapid movement. But above all this splendor hovered the shadow of a true titan of the Ordovician seas. Its name was Camaraceres, a gigantic, straight-shelled nautiloid that could reach 9 meters in length. Its shell was a straight cone, divided internally into numerous chambers. The animal itself inhabited the last largest chamber and used the others as a float, filling them with gas to regulate buoyancy. Camaraceres drifted slowly and majestically through the water, scanning its enormous eyes for prey. Its numerous tentacles, adorned with hooks and suckers, were poised to strike. Spotting an unwary trilobite or ancient fish, this monster would lunge, seize its prey with its deadly tentacles, and its razor-sharp beak would rip apart the shell of its unfortunate prey. It was one of the largest predators of its time, a true marine nightmare. But these cephalopod monsters weren't the only ones to terrorize the inhabitants of the Ordovician seas. At the same time, an incredible diversity of eurypterids, or sea scorpions, appeared. These arthropods, distant relatives of modern spiders and scorpions, were perfectly adapted to life in water. They possessed a long, segmented body covered in a tough chitinous shell, a pair of large compound eyes, and 6 pairs of limbs. The hind legs had evolved into wide paddles, allowing them to maneuver quickly. And the forelimbs were often armed with sharp spines or powerful pincers for capturing prey. Most Ordovician sea scorpions were still relatively small, ranging from 10 to 30 centimeters in length, and hunted small invertebrates on the bottom or in seaweed beds. But even then, larger species had emerged among them, harbingers of the giants that would terrorize the oceans in the Silurian and Devonian periods. These creatures weren't just primitive hunters, but true killing machines, perfectly combining speed, agility, and deadly weaponry. Meanwhile, here, at the bottom of the ancient Ordovician seas, a whole universe of other, no less amazing creatures bustled and flourished. Imagine veritable underwater forests, but composed not of plants, but of animals. These are sea lilies, or crinoids. They were firmly anchored to the seafloor with their long, stem-like appendages, and above them they spread their graceful feathery arms, like living fans, to filter nutrients from the water. These amazing organisms were related to modern sea stars and sea urchins, belonging to the phylum Echinodermata. Their skeletons, composed of calcareous plates, settled to the seabed after death, and, over millions of years, they formed entire layers of so-called crinoid limestone, which geologists still find today. It was during the Ordovician period that these creatures experienced their golden age. Their diversity was simply astonishing, and their underwater vegetation covered vast areas of shallow water. Alongside them, slowly crawling along the very bottom, were their other relatives, sea stars and their more agile cousins, the brittle stars, also known as brittle stars. Sea stars were active and relentless predators. They could use their powerful arms to pry open the shells of bivalves, then turn their stomachs inside out and digest the prey right in its own home. Brittle stars, however, were much more agile. Their long, flexible, snake-like arms allowed them to move quickly across the uneven seafloor in search of carrion or small prey. Sea urchins, on the other hand, were only just beginning their long evolutionary journey, but even then, their spherical shells, completely covered with mobile, sharp spines, a reliable defense against most predators, could already be found on the seafloor. The world of mollusks also didn't stand still. It continued to branch out and give rise to new forms. Bivalves, the distant ancestors of modern oysters, mussels, and scallops, either buried themselves in soft sand or firmly attached themselves to rocks and other hard surfaces. Their neighbors, the gastropods we now call snails, slowly glided over rocks and beds of ancient algae. With their unique organ, a grater-like tongue, which scientists call a radula, they scraped off the nutritious coating. It's quite possible that the first mycorrhizal associations, a partnership between fungi and the first plants, emerged at that time, where the fungus helped the plant extract minerals from the soil and, in return, received nutritious sugars. And then, towards the end of the Ordovician period, a momentous event occurred. The first true land plants appeared. They were tiny, no more than a few centimeters tall, and completely unlike modern plants. They had no roots, no leaves, not even a vascular system for transporting water. Imagine simple green stems, like those we know from Dickinsonia. Their surface was covered with a waxy film called a cuticle, which protected them from the deadly desiccation of the open air. They grew on the damp banks of rivers and lakes, clinging to the soil with specialized outgrowths called rhizoids. They reproduced through spores carried by wind and water. Yes, these first plants were unimpressive. They did not form forests or even dense thickets, but they were true pioneers, the first living creatures that were able to establish themselves on land and live away from constant contact with water. Their appearance marked the beginning of the great colonization of the continents, a process that would last for hundreds of millions of years and forever change the face of our planet. For most of the Ordovician period, the Earth's climate remained warm and stable, but towards its end, truly dramatic changes began. The enormous supercontinent Gondwana, slowly drifting, approached the South Pole. As soon as this gigantic landmass reached polar latitudes, a great glaciation began. Ice began to accumulate on the southern fringes of Gondwana, forming gigantic ice caps, kilometers thick. As the glaciers grew, sea levels began to fall inexorably. Water trapped within the ice sheets no longer returned to the ocean, and so the vast, shallow seas that covered the continental shelves and were a cradle for millions of species began to retreat. For marine life, this was a catastrophe of unimaginable proportions. It was in these warm, shallow seas that the vast majority of all life on the planet lived. When these seas disappeared, so did their inhabitants. Magnificent coral reefs were exposed to the elements, dried up and died. Countless colonies of brachiopods and bryozoans, perfectly adapted to life in shallow waters, lost their home. Trilobites, which had thrived on the vast continental shelves, faced a sharp and catastrophic reduction in their habitat. But this was only the beginning. Falling sea levels completely redrew the map of ocean currents. The warm currents that had previously carried life-giving heat from the equator to the poles were disrupted. The oceans began to stratify. Cold, oxygen-poor water accumulated in the deep, while a thin layer of warm water remained on the surface. This led to chaos in the distribution of nutrients and oxygen. In some areas, deep waters became completely oxygen-free, turning into giant dead zones where life was impossible. The entire planet's temperature began to drop. Gondwana's snow-white ice caps reflected ever more sunlight back into space, only intensifying the global cooling. Tropical species accustomed to warm waters simply couldn't survive in the new, cold world. Species from temperate latitudes were driven out by the advancing polar conditions. Ecosystems began to collapse one after another, triggering a chain reaction, a cascade of extinctions that swept across the planet. This event became known as the Ordovician-Silurian mass extinction. It was one of the 5 greatest in Earth's history. Scientists estimate that approximately 85% of all marine animal species disappeared from the face of the planet. Entire groups of organisms were wiped out forever. Numerous families of trilobites became extinct, although a few lucky ones managed to survive the cataclysm and survive into the following Silurian period. The vast majority of brachiopod species perished. Coral reefs were almost completely destroyed. Giant cephalopods like camaracheros, rulers of the Ordovician seas, disappeared forever. Crinoids, whose dense forests covered the seafloor, suffered horrific losses. The extinction occurred in 2 stages, in 2 fatal blows. The first phase was associated with the onset of glaciation and a sharp drop in sea levels. The second phase occurred when glaciation suddenly ended and the ice began to melt rapidly. Sea levels rose just as rapidly, but this brought no relief to the survivors. On the contrary, the abrupt change in conditions triggered a new second wave of extinctions. The oceans mixed, and anoxic deep waters rose to the surface, poisoning the shallows. The climate became wildly unstable, alternating between freezing and scorching temperatures. But life, as has happened many times before, proved its remarkable resilience. Even after such a monstrous catastrophe, many groups of organisms managed to survive. Trilobites, though greatly reduced in numbers, continued to exist. Brachiopods, mollusks, and echinoderms all survived and began a slow, painful recovery. And vertebrates, still few in number, and humble bottom dwellers, survived this great extinction virtually unscathed. The catastrophe cleared the stage for them. They were ready to take advantage of the new opportunities that opened up in the next geological period. The Ordovician period was a time of great flourishing, a great biological explosion, but it ended in a time of great catastrophe. It vividly demonstrated that even the most successful and diverse ecosystems can be completely destroyed by abrupt climate change. It demonstrated the fragility of life in the face of global planetary processes. But it also demonstrated its incredible strength, its ability to rise from the ashes even after the most terrible blow. But this catastrophe, this icy oblivion, also demonstrated something else, the incredible, almost stubborn will of life itself. Its ability to heal, adapt, and once again strive along the path of evolution, even when all seems lost. Let's return for a moment to those bygone times. Imagine the oceans of the Ordovician period, a world woven from wonders. Giant predatory cephalopods soared silently in the deep blue, their shadows gliding over the first coral reefs, literally pulsing with life. Underwater meadows woven from sea lilies or crinoids gently swayed in the rhythm of the underwater currents, and the first fish, clad in bony armor, slowly moved along the very bottom. This was an era of the undisputed dominance of giant invertebrates, an era when our distant ancestors with backbones were only just beginning their long and arduous journey to the top of the food chain. However, this wondrous world was already on the threshold of its end. The icy breath blowing from the gigantic continent of Gondwana had already begun to chill the southern seas. A new era was dawning, ready to erase the old history of life and write its own. And so, 444 million years ago, the planet slowly began to recover from the shock it had experienced. The enormous ice sheets that encased the supercontinent Gondwana began their great retreat. Meltwater rushed into the oceans, and sea levels rose again, flooding coastal plains and creating endless shallow seas. Brachiopods, bivalves that suffered greatly during the extinction, also began to regain their former glory. New species emerged and rapidly occupied the vacated ecological niches. Soon, they covered the seafloor with a solid carpet, filtering the water and creating entire underwater fields of their shells. Nearby, bryozoans built their delicate colonies, anchoring themselves to any solid surface. Trilobites, the hallmark of the Paleozoic, although they suffered heavy losses, still remained an important part of marine ecosystems. Their golden age had passed. They no longer dominated as they once did, but they continued to struggle for survival. Silurian trilobites became more specialized. Some went to greater depths, others learned to swim quickly, and still others perfected the art of burrowing into the bottom mud. Their shells became more complex, acquiring new defensive spines and more sophisticated sensory organs. But in the shadow of these resurgent ecosystems, a new, terrifying force was rising. The true kings of the Silurian seas were destined to be the Eurypterids, or, as scientists call them, the Eurypterids. Having appeared in the Ordovician, these arthropods reached the peak of their power in the Silurian. Some species grew up to 2 meters in length, making them the largest arthropods in the history of the planet. Imagine one of them, the giant Eurypterid of the late Silurian. It was a true monster, the embodiment of primordial terror. Its long, streamlined body was encased in tough chitinous armor. Its deadly pincers, studded with razor-sharp spines, could seize and tear apart almost any prey. Eurypterids became the top of the food chain in the Silurian seas. They hunted fish, smaller relatives, and mollusks. Some species patrolled the water column, propelling themselves swiftly with their paddle-like hind limbs. Others preferred ambush tactics, burrowing into the sand and patiently awaiting their prey. Some even colonized the freshwater of rivers and lakes, and the boldest may have made short forays onto land, pursuing prey in the intertidal zone. Cephalopods also recovered from extinction. Although giant, straight-shelled forms like the monstrous Camaraceros disappeared forever, their descendants, the nautiloids, continued to roam the oceans. Silurian nautiloids were more compact, and their shells acquired a curved or spiral shape. They remained active predators, hovering in the water column and stalking small invertebrates and fish. Meanwhile, vertebrates in the Silurian period were taking their first but crucial steps toward dominance. Jawless fishes, or agnathans, remained the most numerous group. Their armored representatives, the ostracoderms, became increasingly diverse. Some developed more streamlined bodies and efficient fins for fast swimming, while others remained faithful to heavy armor and a leisurely bottom-dwelling lifestyle. Silurian placoderms were still small and primitive, but they laid the foundation for a future dynasty of giant predators that would terrorize the seas in the following Devonian period. But while these dramas unfolded in the deep sea, an even more colossal event was taking place on the surface. The great conquest of land had begun. The Silurian period marked the era when life first truly gained a foothold on the continents. Primitive plants, which had timidly emerged at the end of the Ordovician, began to rapidly evolve. The first vascular plants appeared, organisms with specialized tissues for transporting water and nutrients throughout their bodies. Imagine one of them, Cooksonia. It was a tiny, nondescript creature, no more than 5 to 10 centimeters tall. It consisted of nothing more than a simple forked stem covered in a protective waxy film. At its tips were sporangia, tiny sacs containing spores for reproduction. Cooksonia had no true roots, instead rhizoids, thread-like outgrowths for anchoring to the soil, nor leaves. Photosynthesis occurred directly within the green stem. But despite their primitiveness, Cooksonia and its relatives achieved a true feat. They were able to survive on land continuously, enduring parching air, temperature fluctuations, and the absence of surrounding water. Meanwhile, in the seas of the Silurian period, evolution was not standing still, continuing its grand experiments. Crinoids, or sea lilies, had fully recovered from the catastrophic extinction of the Ordovician. They returned to once again cover the seafloor with dense, swaying forests. Their long stems, sometimes reaching several meters, raised crowns of feathery tentacles high above the bottom. Ocean currents brought them food, plankton, and organic particles, which the sea lilies filtered with their graceful arms. Entire limestone layers, composed almost entirely of fossilized fragments of their stems, testified to the abundance of these animals. Graptolites thrived in the water column, amazing colonial animals that resembled bryozoans but were actually related to chordates. Their colonies attached themselves to floating objects or the seabed, and their skeletons resembled delicate saws or bird feathers studded with hundreds of tiny cups. Each cup housed a single miniature creature. As filter feeders, they played an important role in the marine ecosystem, and their fossils are so diverse that paleontologists still use them to accurately date Silurian geological strata. The water was also filled with more ephemeral creatures. Transparent and fragile jellyfish and comb jellies floated in the currents. Their soft bodies are a true rarity in the fossil record, but rare fortunate finds prove they were numerous and diverse. The continents continued their eternal drift, changing the contours of the world map. Laurentia and Baltica were inexorably drawing closer, preparing for a monumental collision that would, in the next period, give birth to new mountain ranges and forever change the climate. The oceans of the Silurian period didn't yet boast giant coral reefs like those we see today, but life was thriving. Trilobites crawled along the seafloor, Eurypterids ambushed seaweed beds, and giant nautiloids patrolled the open waters like prehistoric submarines. The seafloor was dotted with colonies of brachiopods, bryozoans, and forests of sea lilies. Jellyfish and graptolites drifted through the water, and the first jawed fishes darted past, hunting small prey. On land, green carpets of primitive plants like Cooksonia and Asteroxylon slowly but surely spread across the continents. Tiny arthropods were already crawling among their thin stems, and fungi were extending their invisible hyphal threads through the soil, decomposing organic matter. The sun illuminated these simple yet vibrant landscapes, and for the first time in Earth's history, the continents began to turn green. The Silurian period marked a time of rebirth after a global catastrophe. It was an era of innovation and bold evolutionary experiments. Life, once again, demonstrated its remarkable resilience, ability to recover and adapt. However, towards the end of the period, its concentration began to decline. Plants actively absorbed CO2 from the air, accumulating it as organic matter. The oceans of the Devonian period were a true kingdom of fish. Geoids, which appeared at the end of the Silurian, experienced a veritable evolutionary explosion in the Devonian. They diversified into numerous groups, each occupying its own unique ecological niche. Plecoderms, or armored fishes, reached the top of the food chain. These monsters became the top predators of the Devonian seas. Their massive bony armor, like the armor of a medieval knight, covered their heads and front parts, making them virtually invulnerable, serving both as a weapon and as protection, turning their owner into the perfect living battering ram. Let's travel to the depths of the ancient oceans, where Dunkleosteus reigned supreme, one of the most terrifying nightmares of the Devonian seas. This true leviathan could grow up to 10 meters in length, comparable to the size of a modern school bus, and weighed in the tons. Its entire head was encased in impenetrable armor made of thick bone plates, a veritable living tank, and its jaws. They weren't teeth as we know them, but gigantic bone scissors, razor sharp. These deadly blades constantly sharpened themselves against each other, allowing the monster to easily split the toughest shells of other sea creatures and crush the shells of ammonites. Dunkleosteus was the absolute ruler of its era, a super predator that simply had no worthy rivals. It was the terror of the open waters, tirelessly patrolling its domain and attacking any living creature unfortunate enough to cross its path. However, not all armored fishes or placoderms reached such titanic sizes. Many led a much more modest lifestyle. Take a look at Bothriolapis, a bottom-dwelling creature clad from head to tail in heavy armor. Its front fins had been modified, becoming hard, limb-like appendages. More like an armored vacuum cleaner, it sifted through the bottom mud with its stiff appendages in search of food. Its relatives, such as Antiochus, were also small armored fishes that peacefully scurried along the bottom, feeding on organic debris and small invertebrates. But Philolepis chose a different tactic. Its body became completely flat, allowing it to masterfully camouflage itself, almost completely burying itself in the sand and waiting to ambush its prey. But not all inhabitants of the Devonian seas relied on heavy armor. Acanthodians, often called spiny sharks, continued to conquer the oceans. These small but incredibly fast fish were covered in tiny scales, and their main weapon was a needle-sharp spine located in front of each fin. Acanthodians prevailed not by force, but by numbers and speed, operating in coordinated schools. Ray-finned fishes did not yet play a major role in the Devonian seas, but this was merely the calm before the storm. In the future, they were to become the most numerous and successful group of vertebrates in the world's oceans. But for our story, it was entirely different creatures, lobe-finned fishes that were crucial. Imagine a fish whose fins weren't just mere membranes of skin, but fleshy appendages with a fully functional, bony skeleton inside. This skeleton was strikingly similar to the limb structure of land animals. Lobe-finned fishes were diverse. Coelacanths, for example, were leisurely predators that lived in deep waters and were protected by tough scales. Another group, Lungfishes or lungfishes adapted to life in freshwater and made an incredible evolutionary breakthrough. They learned to breathe atmospheric air using primitive lungs. This ability became their salvation, allowing them to survive when their waters dried up completely during droughts. One of the most striking representatives of the lobe-finned family was Eusthenopteron. This large predator, up to 1.5 meters in length, was an imposing presence. Its powerful, muscular fins were so developed that it could use them for support, literally pushing off the bottom. Eusthenopteron was the master of shallow, overgrown swamps, where it constantly had to wade through dense thickets of algae and maneuver between fallen tree trunks. They laid their eggs exclusively in water, and their larvae were completely aquatic, breathing through gills and swimming with their tails. Only when they matured were they able to set foot on solid ground. This great vertebrate emergence onto land was only possible thanks to another, no less monumental revolution unfolding on the continents. During the Devonian period, the plant world experienced a veritable explosion of evolution. From low, humble forms, they transformed into gigantic trees. Archaeopteris, one of the first tree-like plants, towered 30 meters in height. Its mighty trunk was covered in bark, and fern-like fronds hung from its branches. Archaeopteris reproduced by spores, but its wood was already real, bearing traces of growth rings that indicated the changing seasons. These plants, progymnosperms, were a transitional link between ferns and seed plants. By the end of the Devonian, the first true seed plants appeared. The invention of the seed was an event for the plant world comparable to the emergence of animals on land. The seed contained a reserve of nutrients for the embryo and was protected by a tough seed coat, allowing plants to colonize territories far from water sources. Club mosses also reached gigantic sizes during the Devonian. Lepidodendron and its relatives grew to heights of 30-40 meters, forming the first true forests in the planet's history. These trees presented a bizarre spectacle: a straight, unbranched trunk covered in diamond-shaped scars from fallen leaves and a lush crown at the very top. Horsetails also became tree-like. Calamites reached 10-15 meters in height and formed dense, impenetrable thickets along marshy banks. By the end of the Devonian period, the face of the planet had changed beyond recognition. The continents were clothed in dense, vast forests. But make no mistake, it was an alien, silent world. There was no birdsong in the air, no soft grass underfoot, and no bright splashes of flowers to catch the eye. Straight tree trunks soared skyward, their crowns rustling monotonously in the wind, and beneath them lay a perpetual twilight, dominated by ferns and mosses. The forest floor was a thick layer of rotting leaves and fallen trunks, but this green revolution also had a dark side. Unbeknownst to them, plants set in motion a chain of events that led to a global catastrophe. By absorbing enormous amounts of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, they sequestered it in their wood. When the trees died, some of this carbon remained buried in the soil, never returning to the atmosphere. This led to a gradual drop in CO2 levels and global cooling. Plants' powerful root systems, penetrating deep into the earth, accelerated the destruction of rock, washing tons of minerals and nutrients into the oceans. This was a death sentence for marine ecosystems. Great reef kingdoms, these underwater metropolises, teeming with life, were virtually wiped off the face of the earth. Their ecosystems collapsed, and with this collapse, thousands of species whose survival depended entirely on these coral labyrinths vanished into oblivion. Trilobites, whose numbers had already declined sharply in previous eras, suffered a further devastating blow. Entire families of these ancient arthropods disappeared forever. Placoderms, the armored rulers and apex predators of the Devonian seas, did not survive the final days of this period. Their era came to a tragic end. Every single species of these armored fish became extinct, making way for the new masters of the ocean: sharks and more advanced bony fish. Brachiopods, inhabitants of the seafloor, also suffered colossal losses, although some groups somehow managed to survive. The causes of this mass extinction one of the largest in Earth's history, are incredibly complex and multifaceted. Imagine a world in agony. Sea levels are plummeting, exposing vast swathes of the continental shelf and depriving countless species of their natural habitat. At the same time, oxygen levels in the water are plummeting, causing the mass death of all bottom-dwelling organisms. To top it all off, global cooling spells doom for tropical species adapted exclusively to warm waters. Ancient scorpions were large creatures, some reaching 70 centimeters in length, and possessed powerful pincers and a venomous stinger on their tails. Some still led a semi-aquatic lifestyle, stalking prey in shallow swamps, but others had already fully adapted to life on land, becoming some of the first truly land-dwelling predators. At this time, spiders began to weave their first primitive webs. These weren't yet the trapping lace we know today. Most likely, the webs were used to reinforce the walls of burrows or to create cocoons for eggs. Full-fledged hunting with webs would appear much later, but even then, in the Devonian, spiders were active predators, tracking and attacking small insects and other arthropods. The forest floor was teeming with its own hidden life. Billions of mites and primitive insects swarmed through the fallen leaves, feeding on decaying organic matter, spores, and fungi. They formed the basis of the first terrestrial food webs. Predatory arthropods preyed on herbivores, while larger predators, such as scorpions, in turn preyed on smaller predators. Food chains on land became increasingly complex and diverse. The freshwater of the Devonian period was also teeming with life. Rivers and lakes literally teemed with fish. Lobe-finned fish, ray-finned fish, and even the last of the armored fishes lived here. Invertebrates, mollusks, crustaceans, insect larvae occupied every available niche. Aquatic plants covered the shallows in a dense carpet, providing shelter for a multitude of small animals. By the end of the Devonian period, approximately 359 million years ago, our planet had been transformed beyond recognition. Where once barren plains had been, dense, endless forests now flourished. Vertebrates made the greatest breakthrough in their history, emerging onto land and beginning to colonize a completely new environment. Armored placoderms disappeared from the oceans, but their place was taken by thriving sharks and bony fish. Coral reefs lay in ruins, but life, as always, stubbornly sought ways to recover. The Devonian period was a time of incredible evolutionary breakthroughs and tragic losses. Fish reached unprecedented diversity, but then many of their groups were wiped out by mass extinctions. Plants conquered the land, creating the planet's first forests, but their success also led to global climate change, triggering a catastrophe in the oceans. Vertebrates took their first steps onto land, opening a new chapter in the history of life, but the oceans paid a terrible price. The age of fishes ended in global catastrophe, but the seeds of the future had already been sown. The tetrapods that emerged at the very end of the Devonian would give rise to all future land vertebrates, amphibians, reptiles, mammals, and, ultimately, birds. And the forests that covered the continents would continue to grow and evolve, creating ever more complex and wondrous ecosystems. And although many of the majestic creatures of the Devonian period disappeared forever, new life forms, participants in the next act of the great drama of evolution, were ready to take their place. 359 million years ago, the planet entered one of the greenest eras in its history. The Carboniferous period, or Carboniferous, was named for a reason. It was during this time that gigantic coal deposits formed, which humanity would only begin actively mining hundreds of millions of years later. This was an era when the continents were covered with unprecedented forests, when insects the size of modern seagulls soared through the air, and when the first vertebrates roamed the land, having completely severed their connection to water. Scientists divide the Carboniferous period into two parts: the early Mississippian, which lasted from 359 to 323 million years ago, and the late Pennsylvanian, which lasted from 323 to 299 million years ago. Each of these time periods was unique in its own way. During the Carboniferous, the continents continued their slow movement toward each other, preparing to merge into a which had formed in the Devonian from the merger of the ancient continents of Laurentia and Baltica, was now inexorably approaching the southern giant, Gondwana. Their collision would lead to the formation of great mountain ranges: the Appalachians in North America, the Hercynian Mountains in Europe, and the Ural Mountains in Asia. By the end of the period, these land masses would finally unite into a single supercontinent, the famous Pangaea. But for now, oceans and shallow seas still stretched between them. The climate at the beginning of the Carboniferous period was predominantly warm and very humid. Equatorial regions were literally awash in tropical rainfall, creating ideal conditions for the growth of gigantic swamp forests. Sea levels remained high, and vast lowlands were either flooded by warm seas or became endless swamps. But towards the end of the period, the climate began to change. The formation of Pangaea created a vast landmass, the interior regions of which were cut off from the influence of the oceans. This led to aridization, the gradual drying of inland areas, and the emergence of a seasonal climate where wet periods alternated with dry ones. The Carboniferous period's atmosphere was unlike anything seen before or since. Thanks to photosynthesis from incredibly productive and vast forests, oxygen levels in the air soared to 35%, almost two-thirds higher than today's levels. This supersaturated atmosphere had truly dramatic consequences for life on the planet. Arthropods, whose respiratory system is a simple network of tracheal tubes that deliver oxygen directly to tissues, were able to grow to gigantic, unimaginable sizes, and fire became an even more terrifying and destructive force. Forest fires were ignited by the slightest spark, such as a lightning strike, and raged with unprecedented ferocity, devouring vast swaths of land. Carboniferous forests were utterly alien, otherworldly worlds, unlike anything we see today. The trees that dominated these ecosystems belonged to groups that are now either extinct or represented by humble herbaceous plants. Imagine giant lycopod-like trees that soared up to 45 meters into the sky. Such was the lepidodendron, or scale tree. Its straight, unbranched trunk reached 2 meters in diameter at the base. The bark of this giant was covered in a distinctive diamond-shaped pattern, the scars of fallen leaves giving the tree the appearance of a giant pineapple or snakeskin. At the very top of the lepidodendron was a crown of long, narrow, grass-like leaves. These leaves continually grew and fell, leaving those characteristic scars on the trunk. The root system of this giant was shallow and spreading. Massive rhizomes, known as stigmaria, extended from the base of the trunk like anchors, anchoring the tree in the unstable, marshy soil. Sigillaria, a close relative of lepidodendron, had a similar structure, but its trunk was not smooth but ribbed with vertical furrows. Both groups reproduced not by seeds, but by spores that matured in huge cone-like structures at the treetops. When the spores matured, these cones split open, and millions of microscopic spores were carried by the wind, settling on the moist soil of swamps to give rise to a new generation of giants. Calamites, giant horsetails, also played a key role in the Carboniferous forests. These trees grew to 20-30 meters tall and had hollow, segmented trunks with whorls of thin branches growing from each node. Calamites formed dense, impenetrable thickets along riverbanks and in swamps. Their rhizomes intertwined tightly underwater, creating stable and fast-growing colonies. Ferns filled the lower levels of this gloomy forest. Some were tree-like and reached 10-15 meters in height. For example, Ceronius, one such tree-like fern, had a thick trunk that was actually composed of tightly intertwined aerial roots. This column supported a palm-like crown of enormous feathery fronds at the top, and beneath the canopy of these giants lay a dense green carpet of smaller ferns. Seed ferns, or pteridosperms, were another important group of Carboniferous plants. They did indeed resemble ferns in